Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 2, Approaches to the Study of India's Foreign Policy. We start with the introduction of the unit. Literature on Indian foreign policy offers a range of approaches to the study of the subject. They range from traditional approaches based on the theories of realism and neo-realism, interdependence and complex interdependence, to approaches that are rooted in the domestic culture and socio-political ethos centered on the historical experience and of Indian freedom movement, as well as the ideas and aspirations of the leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru of the India's freedom struggle. At the outset, 2 points need to be stressed. In the first place, while each one of the approaches helps us in an understanding India's foreign policy, can and need better be studied from an eccentric perspective. No single approach would suffice for an understanding of the complexities of the making and conduct of India's foreign policy. Besides, in the available literature, there obtains a quality which is native to the country, nor for that matter policy makers and practitioners have and would ever fit their practices into rigid theoretical framework. A pursuit of the variety of approaches nevertheless offers useful insights to the principles and ideas, mechanisms and instruments, and the actors and forces that have come to frame the objectives and devise appropriate instruments for the formulation and implementation of the country's foreign policy. It also needs to be borne in mind that India's foreign policy is not a simple amalgam of responses to the exigencies of international relations. For whatever regions, size of area, population, economy, leadership, etc., India has consistently sought to influence the course of international relations in an independent and energetic manner, conscious of its responsibilities and commensurate to its status and capabilities in the international system. Our next step is political realist and complex neo-realist approaches to India's foreign policy. There is some evidence in the argument that bearing perhaps the United States realism has had its overriding influence on what could be described as the foreign policy establishment or the strategic community of India. Scholars of an at least six identifiable groups with the military, diplomatic corps, bureaucracy, including the foreign service, political class, policy expert from the academia and the media, and the community of scientists and technologists of the so-called foreign policy establishment. It can be said help shape India's thinking on foreign policy matters. The strategic community is intertwined closely and shares state power more than others. For example, the business community, although the influence of business is on the rise in the wake of the economic liberalization and is evident in the formation of various government business consultative mechanisms. Also, sectors in the middle echelon of the aforementioned six identifiable groups, while do not influences, they at best legitimize policy at the popular level. This should not be surprising, for foreign policy and diplomacy invariably remains the handiwork of the elite. India's strategic community operates more or less within the parameters of political realism or simply realism. The strategic community perceives itself as being pragmatic, responsible, and experienced, and is oriented to practical problem solving. The strategic community does not function in an ad hoc fashion, nor are its responses ad hoc or knee jerk responses. To the contrary, the strategic community, as conscious of the fundamental goals and means at its disposal for the realization of foreign policy objectives. Political realism entails the view of power as the basis of interstate relations, which are seen normally in the conflictual modes, with each state seeking to pursue egoistically its own interest. Neo-realism recognizes the primacy of politics but concedes that international order based on the convergence of interest among actors and not conflict alone is the basis of international relations. With the above in view, at least three goals can be identified with paramount importance attached to the goal of external national security and internal national unity. The two other goals are leadership, at least within the region and at a larger third world level, and a peace of place in the Committee of Nation States appropriate to India's size, stature, and capability. Two assumptions underlie the approach. One, security of Indian state is paramount and is best subsumed as national interest. All other elements and goals are subordinate to this basic national interest. It is the motif or the guiding factor of all political and strategic thinking and planning. It is to be noted that the term security is defined essentially in political military terms. The assumption is that A physically and militarily secure nation state is a sine qua non of the well being and unity of the society. Underlying the supremacy of national security goal is also the belief and the experience of colonialism and foreign domination. Historically, as and when India had a weak or a fissiparous state structure, the country had been prone to foreign domination and rule. The second assumption, and which is related to the first, is that international system is essentially an interstate system. Non-state and trans-state actors are present, but there is no denying the centrality of states in the international system. Legal and ethical norms of international system are and must be followed by all states. But in the end, it is the great powers that shape the world because they have the power. It is a contentious point, but power is unambiguously defined as state power. India, it is argued, is potentially a world power. Therefore, it should try to fulfill this potential, and its foreign policy should reflect this aspiration and promote its achievement. India's nuclear and missile development programs, its space research, and its scientific and technological achievements, large and highly professional defense forces under civilian control, a highly competent bureaucracy, and a large pool of highly skilled professionals, and no less a visionary political leadership and Indian democracy with its national consensus on the above meaning of the national interest are all seen as vital elements in the realization of national security and a great power status. Skillful democracy, which was the hallmark of the foreign policy under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru. Military prowess that India began systematically building under Indira Gandhi, and political astuteness to engage all significant powers in political and strategic dialogues that characterizes Indian foreign policy since the 1990s are vital capabilities of a great power that India has so consistently demonstrated. It is in such a vein that political pronouncements and analysis often describe India as a great power or potentially a great power. Description of India as a great power, an emergent power, and at times as superpower, sometimes still with an interrogation mark, have become more frequent in the aftermath of the nuclearization and the significant achievements made in the field of missile technology since 1998. Is some kind of a pax indica possible since independence and well up to the 1960s? India's strategic community saw the country as destined to be a future great power of the Asia rivaled only by two other Asian powers, namely Russia and China. By the 1980s, Indian realists had a more ambitious view, but argued realistically for India's regional preeminence to be acknowledged by the rest of the world. In other words, the view was to project the country as the leader, if not the hegemon of South Asia. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the ensuing uncertainties of the post Cold War era, the idea to view the country as a great power and that it be so recognized by the international community has gained firmer grounds. To the idea of regional preeminence is appended the desire of a strong and responsible global player. In complex neo-realism periods of transition in international relations such as the one witnessed in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, offer significant opportunities for upward mobility to certain intermediate powers. Indian foreign policy in the 1990s, including India's successes in the development of nuclear weapons and long-range missile delivery system, is seen as a time-tested approach to enter the concern of great powers on the basis of its military strength. There are certain themes that reoccur in the Indian realist view of foreign policy. For most, and it is seen more or less regularly, is to view China as an actual or a potential strategic rival or competitor of India. The India-China conflict of 1962 and the border dispute have strengthened the view that the two big and strong neighbors are destined to be rivals, at least periodically. Pakistan hostility, including the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir, tilt towards Soviet Union during Cold War, including the 1971 Treaty of Friendship with that country, and the entire gamut of Indo-US relations have always had and continue to have a Chinese dimension. Emergence of China as a great military and economic power would have major repercussions for the security of Asia and the Pacific, including the Indian Ocean region. The resulting disbalancing and rebalancing of regional equations would surely impinge on Indian sovereignty and security. A large-sized India, second in terms of population, its large GNP and skilled manpower, and with its more than a million strong defense forces, had to stand up and possibly emerge stronger in the wake of destabilizing effects of China. The view that China is India's enemy number one, which the Indian political leadership enunciated just prior to the nuclear experiments of 1998, are a piece of such a realistic thinking. The aforementioned proposition is precisely the kind of historical notion of interstate relations and geopolitical thinking realists in general entertain. It is also true that many Indian realists do not preclude the possibility of a strong India and a strong China turning into strategic allies or friendship at some future date. It is to counter pointedly the Chinese strategy challenge and put India in the big power league that much of the justifications for nuclearization have been proffered. Often, thus, it has been argued that India's decision to go nuclear has been independent of its relationship with Pakistan. In such a preoccupied perception, India China Pakistan relations are viewed as an anti India strategic alliance. Our rivals' great insecurity is our security, is the dictum of competitive security approach, which is sometimes promoted by the realists. Relations with Pakistan consume a good deal of time and energy of India's foreign policy planners and analysts. A stable, secure, and preferably a democratic Pakistan is in India's greater national interest than a Pakistan which is jingoistic, authoritarian, and on a collision course with India. There are Pakistan which is several problems areas which are identified in Indo-Pakistan relations. Pakistan's membership in the Western Alliance system had brought Cold War to the doorsteps of India. India had to resort a highly skillful diplomacy towards of the threat of consummation of such an alliance relationship. Since then, the Western powers, particularly the US, have viewed Pakistan in terms of their own global strategic interest. First, it was viewed as a bulwark against Soviet expansionism and its search for warm waters in the Arabian Sea or Indian Ocean region that made Pakistan a frontline state in the Cold War calculus of the US. Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in 1978 made Pakistan once again a frontline state, this time as a conduit of arms and money to the Mujahideens in the grand battle between the East and the West. In the wake of the terrorist attack in US on September 11, 2001, Pakistan has once again become a frontline state, this time in the US war against international terrorism. Besides, the West in the general is looking at Pakistan as a gateway to the grand opening that awaits the exploitation of natural gas and other minerals in Central Asian regions. Interestingly, Indian foreign and security policy planners have rarely, perhaps for understandable reasons, taken into account the thesis of a decline in the US power, which many neo-realists had peddled during the Cold War. Yet another matter of concern has been Sino-Pakistan axis. Pakistan has been the most reliable friend of China ever since the latter was in near isolation in international affairs. China's clandestine support to Pakistan's nuclear and missile development programs is an evidence of anti-India axis of their friends relationship. It is the play of extraneous powers and forces which are intent on creating a sort of military party between Pakistan and India, which has remained a matter of great concern to Indian foreign policy planners and leaders. For India, which is several times the size of Pakistan in terms of territory, population, GNP, and military preparedness, the externally induced idea of parity is seen as a bid to stymie India's own great power claim. The convergence of international and regional strategic forces and actors, and the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir bedevil India-Pakistan relations. Realists point out that Pakistan's intransigencies and pursuit of adversarial relationship are also impinging on national unity. Pakistan is the direct source of many of India's domestic problems, including trans-border terrorism and support for militant groups in Jammu and Kashmir and northeast India. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.